March 27, 1977. A day that changed aviation forever. On a foggy runway in the Canary Islands, two Boeing 747 jumbo jets collided in a catastrophe that claimed 583 lives. It remains the deadliest accident in aviation history. This is the story of the Tenerife Airport Disaster. The disaster began not in Tenerife, but in Gran Canaria. A terrorist bombing at Las Palmas Airport forced multiple incoming flights to divert to the smaller Los Rodeos Airport on Tenerife. Among them, KLM Flight 4805 and Pan Am Flight 1736, both massive Boeing 747s. Los Rodeos was not equipped to handle this sudden influx. Taxiways were congested. Visibility was poor due to thick fog. Communication between pilots and air traffic control was strained, and tragically misunderstood. KLM's captain, Jacob Veldhuizen van Zanten, one of the airline's most experienced pilots, believed he had clearance to take off. Pan Am was taxiing on the same runway, unseen in the fog. At 5:06 p.m., KLM began its takeoff roll, unaware that Pan Am was still on the runway. Seconds later, the KLM jet slammed into the Pan Am aircraft. The impact tore both planes apart. Fires erupted instantly. The scene was apocalyptic. All 248 people aboard the KLM flight perished. On the Pan Am flight, 335 died, but 61 miraculously survived, escaping through holes in the fuselage and running through burning debris. Rescue efforts were hampered by the fog, confusion, and lack of proper equipment. The tragedy was total. Investigators cited multiple causes: miscommunication, ambiguous phrasing, lack of standardized terminology, and the absence of ground radar. The phrase "we are now at takeoff" was misinterpreted as clearance, a fatal misunderstanding. The two aircraft had landed at Los Rodeos earlier that Sunday, and were among a number of aircraft diverted to Los Rodeos due to a bomb explosion at their intended destination of Gran Canaria Airport. Los Rodeos had become congested with parked planes blocking the only taxiway, forcing departing aircraft to taxi on the runway. Patches of thick fog were drifting across the airfield, so visibility was greatly reduced for pilots and the control tower. An investigation by Spanish authorities concluded that the primary cause of the accident was the KLM captain's decision to take off in the mistaken belief that a takeoff clearance from Air Traffic Control, ATC, had been issued. Dutch investigators placed a greater emphasis on a mutual misunderstanding in radio communications between the KLM crew and ATC, but ultimately KLM admitted that its crew was responsible for the accident, and the airline agreed to financially compensate the relatives of all of the victims. Eyewitnesses said the airport is now covered in dense black smoke following the explosions, and emergency services are struggling to cope with the enormous numbers of casualties. Rescue workers have been plunging into the burning wreckage to pull out survivors. The Army is expected to move in to help the rescue operation. Neither airline was originally due to be at the airport, but both were diverted from the much bigger Las Palmas on nearby Gran Canaria Island after a terrorist bomb blast near the departure lounge. Experts say it is too early to suggest the cause of the crash, but many believe it was in part due to the extra number of flights and pressure on resources at the small airport following several diversions from Las Palmas. It will once again place security at Spanish airports under the spotlight, hard-pressed by package tour flights. A crash of such magnitude before takeoff has horrified industry insiders. Previously, the worst accident in aviation history was a Turkish Airlines crash near Paris with the loss of 346 lives. Both planes involved in the crash had been scheduled to depart from Las Palmas on the island of Gran Canaria. However, a terrorist bombing there earlier in the day caused the planes to be diverted to the small Los Rodeos airport on the island of Tenerife. Later, just as KLM Flight 4805 prepared to take off from the single airstrip at Los Rodeos, the plane barreled into Pan American World Airways, Pan Am, Flight 1736, which had been taxiing toward takeoff at the same time. The force from the crash tore through the fuselage of the Pan Am plane, and both aircraft exploded into flames. All 248 passengers and crew members aboard the KLM plane were killed. On the Pan Am plane, 335 people died, but 61, including the pilot, survived the impact and fire. Many survivors escaped from a hole near the plane's left wing. Some experts speculated that the KLM plane had begun its takeoff without proper clearance, though a number of factors, including foggy weather and unusual airport traffic conditions, likely played a role in the disaster. It had originated at Los Angeles International Airport, with an intermediate stop at New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport, JFK. The aircraft was a Boeing 747-121, registration N736PA, named Clipper Victor. Of the 380 passengers, mostly of retirement age but including 2 children, 14 had boarded in New York, where the crew was also changed. All but 5 passengers on board the aircraft were Americans. The non-American passengers were all Canadian nationals. They were on their way to board the cruise ship Golden Odyssey for a 14-day trip across the Mediterranean. 14. The new crew consisted of Captain Victor Grubbs, age 56, First Officer Robert Bragg, 39, Flight Engineer George Warnes, 46, and 13 flight attendants. At the time of the accident, Grubbs had 21,043 hours of flight time, of which 564 hours were on the 747. Bragg had 10,800 flight hours, of which 2,796 hours were on. The Tenerife disaster led to sweeping changes in aviation. Standardized phraseology, cockpit resource management training, and improved airport radar systems were implemented worldwide. The tragedy became a turning point, ensuring that such a disaster would never happen again. Both flights had been routine until they approached the islands. At 13:15, a bomb planted by the separatist Canary Islands independence movement exploded in the terminal of Gran Canaria Airport, injuring 8 people. Due to the threat of a second bomb, the civil aviation authorities closed the airport temporarily after the initial explosion, and all incoming flights bound for Gran Canaria were diverted to Los Rodeos, including the 2 aircraft involved in the disaster. The Pan Am crew indicated that they would prefer to circle in a holding pattern until landing clearance was given. They had enough fuel to safely stay in the air for 2 more hours, but they were ordered to divert to Tenerife. Los Rodeos was a regional airport that could not easily accommodate all of the traffic diverted from Gran Canaria, which included 5 large airliners. The airport had only 1 runway and 1 major taxiway running parallel to it, with 4 short taxiways connecting the 2. While waiting for Gran Canaria Airport to reopen, the diverted planes took up so much space that they had to park on the long taxiway, making it unavailable for the purpose of taxiing. Instead, departing aircraft needed to taxi along the runway to position themselves for takeoff, a procedure known as a backtaxi or backtrack. The refueling took about 35 minutes, after which the passengers were brought back to the aircraft. The search for a missing Dutch family of 4, who had not returned to the waiting KLM plane, delayed the flight even further. Additionally, Rabina van Landschot, 20, a tour guide, had chosen not to reboard for the flight to Las Palmas, because she lived on Tenerife and thought it impractical to fly to Gran Canaria only to return to Tenerife the next day. She was therefore not on the KLM plane when the accident happened, and was the only survivor of those who flew from Amsterdam to Tenerife on Flight 4805. 583 lives lost. Countless lessons learned. The Tenerife Airport disaster remains a solemn reminder of the importance of clarity, caution, and communication in aviation. May we never forget. Enjoyed the video? That's just the beginning. Subscribe now and join our journey through the most gripping moments in history.